Bear with me a second, sorry. Oh no, it's under the
Should we introduce ourselves in a way while waiting, maybe?
Yeah, that's a good idea, actually. So we could do a round in, should we do a round in the room first? I can grab my room computer here and walk around a bit. So, Pirette, would you like to start?
So my name is Pirette Saar, and I work in Dual. And Dual works with continuous integration for enterprise scale systems. And I work as a system architect at Dual. I have been in contact with quite a lot with enterprise scale CI architecture, also events, pipelines, all kinds of things. So this is a very interesting topic for me.
Yes, you can send it back to Melissa there.
Hi, I'm Melissa Mckay. I'm a developer advocate with JFrog, and I'm chair of the interoperability SIG, and so very interested in CDEvents, a child that came out that has been pretty successful here. I want to take information away, hopefully to share with our own engineering teams to see if maybe we can get some interest in, implementing this or at least helping to contribute. Thanks.
Thank you.
Hey, that's me. That's Mauricio. Yes, working also with VMware and Knative, but very interested in CDEvents. And I've been working with it for some time now, and I'm hoping to be able to keep working on it for more time.
Hey, I'm Dave Stanky. I'm a developer advocate from Google. I'm one of the maintainers on the 4 Keys project, which is an open source dashboard for DORA metrics. If you haven't heard an earful about that already, please, I would love to talk to you about it. But we are in the business of receiving information about software delivery processes, and that's hard. And it sounds like this group wants to help solve that problem. So I'm all for it.
Awesome.
Hey, my name is Sasha. I'm from IBM, DevOps engineer doing code engineer, and I'm community lead of Shipwright. And Shipwright is actually a very good fit to eventually send CDEvents.
Thanks. So we're doing a round of introductions. If you would like to introduce yourself as well. It's not mandatory, but I will offer up the mic to you.
Sure. My name is David Lai. I come from FutureWay. I'm the CDF board member. I'm happy to hear because I try to see whether this new initiative project, I think that's one of the very interesting things will be benefit to the community. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yes. So I guess, Andrea, we should introduce ourselves as well. You want to start?
Yeah, sure. My name is Andrea Frittoli. I'm a developer advocate at IBM. And yeah, I'm one of the co-creator of the CDEvents project. I'm co-chair of the SIG events, and I'm part of the CDF TOC as well, so the Technical Oversight Committee, and where one of our mission is about interoperability between the projects in the CDF and beyond. So.
Yes, and I am Erik Sternesson. I work with Pirette at Dual, so continuous integration, mainly for industry projects like autonomous drive and such solutions. So more towards embedded and safety certification and those kind of things, less towards cloud. So I think it's good that we have a wide base of different interests in CI/CD here. Sorry. And I would like to tell you a story. Do we start the screen sharing, I guess?
Oh, yeah. Okay. Okay, we have the Ethernet.
Yes. So back in November 2019, I was working at Volvo Cars, And I got the mission together with Piret to try to explain module by module, step by step, how our continuous integration setup worked. So we spent like a week in front of this massive whiteboard, just drawing boxes for everything so that we could present it in a rational and logical way. And when looking at that whiteboard, we had like 72 different components. Not super surprising, perhaps, but there was a lot of like Jenkins and Artifactory and those kind of things just to bring everything together. There was a lot of configuration stuff, but around 25 of those components were just glue code. So just trying to bring things together. And yeah, having your Jenkins pipeline to invoke something, some Python script that in turn integrates with Artifactory or integrates with our own message bus, which we had at the time. And I remember thinking, this has to be something that everyone else is doing as well, because back then there wasn't really a good way there wasn't a good way to make things work together rather than writing, or instead of writing just your own glue code. And I also remember thinking there has to be a better way, and I firmly believe that CDEvents has the opportunity to become that better way. So we should probably give a bit of an introduction to CDEvents then. Most of you will have heard it already, but we can talk a little bit about it, I guess.
Yeah. One thing, maybe I realized we introduced the people in the room here.
Oh, we forgot the people online.
online. So
Yeah. I got so consumed by my story.
So I'll make a quick pause, and sorry about that. Maybe folks in the virtual attendance would like to introduce themselves.
So, Emil, you want to start?
Sure. Yeah, I can go first. So my name is Emil Beckmark. I'm located in Sweden, currently at home. I unfortunately cannot be with you in Austin. So I'm together with Andrea, the co-chair of the CDEvents, and also one of the founders then of the CDEvents project. I'm also a member of the Eiffel event project, Eiffel community, where we develop an event protocol, or have developed for long. I'm employed by Ericsson, and yeah, very much looking forward to the work we do together here.
So we can do Adam next.
I guess I'll be I'll be the first Adam to go. My name is Adam Kaplan. I'm a software engineer at Red Hat. I am also a co-community lead with Sasha on the Shipwright project, and as Sasha mentioned, we are definitely interested in becoming a participant in the CDEvents ecosystem.
Yes. So I should mention to the people online, it's of course voluntary if you want to introduce yourself. But other Adam, would you like to say a few words?
Hello, I'm Adam.
The volume is super low, unfortunately. We can barely hear you.
Oh, sorry, it was off my
Yes.
head. I'm Adam. I'm a software engineer at Ericsson. Ericsson Software Technology, the open source division of Ericsson. And I've been just working with Jalander for the last few months, trying to get OpenVPN integrated into Spinnaker.
Very good. So Jalander, would you like to go next?
Yes, yeah, I'm Jalander. So working in Ericsson, I'm a senior software engineer. So recently we started contributing to CDF events for Java SDK, and we also started with Spinnaker integration with the CDEvents, so that we are working on the POC to try to integrate Spinnaker into the CDEvents. So looking forward to work with more people with CDEvents. So it's great to work. Yeah.
Happy to hear. Govri, do you want to go next? If I pronounce that correctly. Maybe not. So Nicholas, would you like to say anything or introduce yourself?
Yes, hello. I'm Nicholas. I work at Apple on the Spinnaker team. So we're also interested in seeing how CDEvents can be integrated with Spinnaker and how they can open further integrations with other tools that could understand these events.
Very, very nice. So we have Kara in the meeting, but she doesn't seem to be on audio, so I guess she will not be able to introduce herself. So I guess that's everyone, I think. So should we, now that we've taken care of all the introductions, should we talk a little bit about CDEvents? Oh, we can read what Kara said. Hi all, I am an ecosystem advocate at the CDF and have been involved in CDEvents for some time. I was co-chair of CDF Interoperability SIG when the work on CDEvents started by this awesome group. I am in moderator mode for a virtual event, so I don't seem to be able to show my camera or use microphone, but I'm very happy this event is happening. Yes.
Sorry that you're not able to join, Kara. Strange. Okay, let me start the screen sharing again. Yeah, I guess.
I think we have something on CDEvents later in the presentation.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right. Just to give some background on where we come from. So in the CDF, the special interest group about interoperability started discussing about how to have all the projects in the CD space being able to interoperate with each other. And one of the things that they started looking at in the beginning was different terminology that is used by the different projects, and they started compiling like a Rosetta Stone of terminology so that we can understand each other, because there are like different names in different projects that mean different things, or sometimes even the same name means different things across different projects. One of the work streams within the interoperability working group was focusing on events. And so later that work stream evolved into its own special interest group. So the SIG events, special interest group, and that created the CDEvents project then later on. So what is CDEvents? So there are a few things. So it's a vocabulary. Again, we want to create like a shared language, a common language for tools in the CI/CD space to describe what they are doing. It's also a specification. So we are building kind of JSON schema, so that describe how, if you're sending events, how you should compile them, how you should structure them, so it's easy then for the receiving side to parse those messages as well. It's a project, and it's an incubating project in the CDF, and we are working towards the first release of our specification. So it's in progress, and this is a good time to kind of, bring your use cases, and we are really listening to the community to understand what is it that we can help with, a specific problem that we can solve with CDEvents to make sure that we get the specification in the right direction. Yeah, some history I covered already. Maybe a little bit more in details about the vocabulary and how we structure a specification. We have several events in CDEvents, and we try to group them in different phases or groups of events that are specific to kind of the area in your CI/CD workflow where these events are going to be generated. And we have the core events, which are like the lower abstraction, if you will, type of events. So they are describing like pipeline orchestration type of events, like pipeline started, pipeline finished, task run, started and finished, and so forth. We have the source code version control, so the SCM type of events, which are all about changes happening in your source code, right? So this is the type of event that you will get from your GitHub or GitLab or Bitbucket about a change has been merged, and this is the SHA of this change, and what are we going to do with this change? Then we have the continuous integration pipelines type, or the continuous integration type of event, the bucket, where we have events that describe the typical things that happen during that CI phase, so like builds and testing that is happening. And also we have events about artifacts, and this is a very key area because there is a plethora of tools out there that are able to build different kind of artifacts from container images or else. But there is, again, no common language to describe these artifacts. So it's really important for us to get this right, and we are really happy also to have like the Shipwright community joining today about this. So we have the continuous deployment bucket or phase where we talk about environments. So we have like environments that can be created, provisioned, or turned down. We have services that can be deployed in this environment. So this allows us to reason about application being deployed. And more recently, we have been looking at also going further beyond this into the area of discussing about or reasoning about incidents. So what happens if I do a change, I do a deployment, but that doesn't go well? Or if I have maybe even some SLI or SLOs defined for my service and they degrade, and I want to be able to notify that this is happening, and maybe have like an automated remediation happening. And then again, if the remediation happens, whether it's manual or automated, we want to know that. And so we have event for that we are working on. So those are more in the phase of specification, but we have been working with the Captain project. They have cloud events that they defined for what they call the application lifecycle side, which is, they call them problems. And they offer to donate those events into CDEvents. So we are discussing how to integrate these events into the project. I guess we talk about CDEvent specification. One thing that maybe is worth mentioning is the binding. So what is the relationship between CDEvents and cloud events, basically? So cloud events is a CNCF project that allows you to abstract away the specific messaging protocol that you use to transport events, right? So if you're developing an application and you don't want to, be committed from the beginning, I'm going to use MQTT, and that's it. That's going to be the protocol I'm using. You want to have the flexibility of changing protocol. Then cloud events gives you this flexibility because it defines like a standard way of building your event envelope, so where you put your data in. And then you can decide even later on at configuration time, say, okay, I'm going to transport this over HTTP, I'm going to transport it over MQTT, NATs, or whatever specific binding that you want to use. So our working assumption now is that we're going to transport CDEvents over cloud events because it makes sense. It's very convenient. It gives this extra power and abstraction. So we're defining the binding and setting some extra rules on how the cloud events envelope should be sent when we are sending CDEvents. Use cases.
Yes, we can go through it quickly, but the two main use cases, or the first of the two main use cases, is interoperability, so making things work together. So I think there is a lot of stuff here, but I'm going to go through it very quickly. So this is, again, from my work at Volvo Cars. So different teams build their stuff with different solutions, some Zool, GoCD, GitLab, Jenkins, and we get some stuff from suppliers. But they all have to end up in a car, and we all want to be able to test them with like the Carla self-driving simulator. So the packages have to end up in the same destination. And we then would ask ourselves, okay, but a package built by Zool, what is that called? Well, it's called an artifact. In fact, they're all called artifacts. But this seems more by happenstance than by planning, because they are all different artifacts. They all have different metadata. They all have different deliveries and how they are used, basically. So this means that we again have to write a lot of glue code to handle different types of artifacts, because we need that metadata and we can't easily get to it. And this, of course, is true for a lot of things other than just artifacts. So glue code again. And the solution could be CDEvents. If we could say or make these tools or find some translation somewhere so that all these are presented as CDEvents artifacts, then we have the metadata in a known format, and we could even switch out or introduce new type of build systems to build the stuff that we want, which would make our life a lot easier. So interoperability is one of our main use cases.
Thanks, Eric. Yeah, and the second area where we think CDEvents has a great potential, it can help a lot, is observability and metrics. Again, if you have a system, or a CI/CD workflow that starts from where you're writing your software through testing, releasing, deploying, and maybe rollback or incident management, and you may have different platforms involved in that system. So you may be using GitHub or a combination of Jenkins and Tekton for your test, and maybe you use Argo CD or you use Captain for your remediation workflows. And so you want to know what's going on in your workflow at any point in time, or you want to keep track of how long it takes for your workflows to be executed. You know, maybe know how long it takes from when a certain piece of code is written to when it gets into production. That is the vision that we have is that if all this platform would send event in a common language, then an event collector could add all these events in one place, and then you could use this data to do things like visualizing the workflow on one side, calculating metrics like the DevOps metrics, that Dave was mentioning earlier. That are about how often are we deploying our software, how long it takes from source to get into production, and etc. So that's one of the other core use case that we hope to address with this. Let's see. Yeah, I think we.
Yeah. So basically, our plan for today is not to have too much of a plan. We would like to hear what people want to talk about. If everyone goes into awkward panic mode, we do have some topics prepared that we could talk about, but we would much rather talk about what you want to talk about. So basically, anyone who has anything they would like to discuss, we probably shouldn't stick to one topic for the entire session in case there are several ideas, but definitely to start with, what would any of you in the room or online want to discuss or talk about? Yes, Maurizio.
Sorry. Right.
Yeah, you can start online there.
Sure. So yeah, I looked at the spec, and one thing that I was kind of expecting to see and didn't see is some sort of structure that links the events. It seems to me I could see things like ID, timestamp, source, object, things like that, but not any sort of graph of relationship between these events. And if you look at any sort of visualization of pipelines, often you'll see them as a graph. That's the case in Spinnaker or Tekton or things like that. And here it looks like the event stream would be flat, right? And there's no connection between each one. So is that something that's being considered, or is it a conscious design decision to not include this sort of structure? Could you talk a bit about that?
This is an excellent topic to start with, I think. And I'm wondering, Emil, would you like to say a few words when it comes to linking events? Or do you want one of us to take it?
No, I guess I could take it. Happy, Nicholas, for the opportunity to talk about this, actually. So I don't know. how we should do it. But maybe first, yes, we have talked about it a bit. It has been raised in various forms in different forums, how we should relate events to each other. There are two main ways to do it, I would say. One is to create a graph, as you said, of linked events that are linked upstream and downstream in your whole end-to-end pipeline, so to say. And the other way would be to relate events through some context ID, which is often used in many systems today as well that sends events. That way, it's a bit limited to only use contexts, I would say. Then you could, of course, relate all events within a pipeline to a certain pipeline context, or all events related to a certain component to some component context, or whatever you decide. But having links gives you a bit more freedom, I would say. I would call them links because that's what we call them in this Eiffel event protocol that I mentioned in my presentation, or maybe when I presented myself. So I often use the term links there, as you also did, Nicholas. So, but references that could go upstream, downstream to form a graph. So if you want, I could show quickly some slides from a presentation I held last year on CDEcon on actually event links. Is that?
I think that would be good. You want to do that for a few minutes?
Yep. So I'll go ahead and share my screen then, just a second. Let's see where we are. I'm switching. Soon I'll be there. Bear with me. Now I will share this screen with you. Okay, yeah, so you see this now. So I had a presentation last year on CDEcon, which was, the title was linking, if I can just go back to the linking of events. So the linking of events to achieve traceability and data aggregation. So on top of the use cases that were mentioned about interoperability and observability and metrics, if you would also link the events in a way similar to how I described it here, you could also achieve traceability through your end-to-end pipeline, and you could make it possible to aggregate data from these events in a very generic and generic manner for all of your events. So I think that this was, I think you mentioned this, Andrea, what an event is, but if you didn't, maybe we should just revisit that. So what is really an event? Maybe not everyone is aware of what we talk about when we say events there. You talked about an envelope of cloud events and that we put something in there. And the thing we put in there is really a data record that expresses an occurrence in the CI/CD system, so to say, an occurrence with a context surrounding the occurrence. The events are then sent from a producer to a consumer through a message broker, and this is taken directly from the cloud events specification. But then links then. So if we have two different events here, symbolized with these different bullets here. In this picture, I use arrows that symbolizes the actual links. So the red event here has a link to something, to the blue event in some way. So the way it's done in this Eiffel protocol that I refer to is that the event A has an ID field, a UUID, and then the event B references that event through its, by just adding the actual event ID into the event B. Not a full URI or URL to some event, but just the ID. And since the UID is unique, at least in the context that these events are sent, it's deterministic to what event this means. So that's how a general link is set up in Eiffel. And then the next event coming could then relate to the previous event, the event B in this picture. But then we also use semantic links. We make these links semantic. So we put an attribute on top of the actual link. So an event could link to two different events, for example, in this case, with two different types of links. So there could be a type X and a type Y. And I will come back to some example on exactly what these types could be. I just want to show that one event could link to multiple upstream events. And in the same way, multiple different events could link to the same upstream events. So there's a flexibility in this area as well. And this way we could form such an event graph that you talked about there. So this below, the picture below there is just a very huge or somehow huge graph of a lot of events with a lot of interlinks between them in a directed acyclic graph format. So what could you use this for then? Well, you could trace events end to end. So you can see what happens in a complex production flow from the earliest source code commit to of a low-level binary or something in your system, or in some other library that you're dependent on, all the way to the customer deployment far to the right and beyond. And you can trace backwards or upstream to find out what source changes are involved in a certain artifact version. And you can also trace forwards or downstream, as this blue line symbolizes here, to find out where a certain application has been deployed, for example. So if the rightmost event symbolizes 3 different deployments, and the blue in the middle there is your artifact that is built and then tested somehow, you can then see where was this deployed. And this, of course, doesn't need to be the same CI/CD system that does all this, as long as they share the same vocabulary and send links in the same format. Maybe I should stop there for now, so we don't go too far into this without having further questions, maybe.
Yes.
So my question was, you know, this is exactly what I was asking about, but this doesn't seem to be in the spec. Like the links field that you described is not a required field, or it's not even listed as option.
Exactly. So we have it's I think we have written an issue for it that we should talk about it, or at least it's a discussion point. But so far we haven't put it in. But I would look forward to see it part of the specification, maybe optional, but anyway, part of it, so it's possible to do these links. But yeah, so far we haven't included it. But yeah, we should, of course. I think we should at least.
Okay, great, thanks.
Yeah, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, just a sort of question / request or something. You know, I think that there's potentially, we could do a lot of this stuff without having the data actually linking to each other, as long as a system that's interpreting it can match the entities between the events, right? One thing I'm not clear about is, you know, every event has a UUID. Is that intended to be generated uniquely for the CD event, or would that potentially be the same UUID as like a system event? So for example, Cloud Build, our hosted, you know, build system on Google Cloud, has a UUID for every build that happens. Would we reuse that for the ID, or would we create a new one? And if it's the second, which someone's nodding their head about, then is there a standard for then embedding our UUID that we've already created, so that we could then reference that based on other events, because we know something about that build?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, so you want to say something, Mauricio, or? No, I think, yeah, the idea would be a separate UUID. So the requirement that we have is that a event UUID must be unique within the source of the event, so that you can control its unicity as an event producer. And then we have what we call the UID of the subject. So if you're doing like talking about builds, then the build ID could be the cloud build ID that you use there, and that's unique again within the source.
I'm sort of struggling to find that in the spec, but I'm not good at reading specs like this. But it's telling me.
That's the idea.
Okay, and we would be able to know not only that is the UUID of the build but it's a UUID of a build in a system called Cloud Build, right? And we know what that's there.
Yeah. So we have source and subject as part of the Cloud Events attribute, if I don't remember correctly.
Okay, yeah.
So source would then be, for instance, your Cloud Build setup or something that uniquely identifies where did this event come from. And the subject doesn't have to be just the UUID. It could, for instance, be the name of whatever artifact you're building and then a slash and then the UUID. I think Andrea has done some proposals regarding the subject. And I'm not sure actually if the subject is in the spec or if it's still in a discussion, that work that you've done on the subjects. So it might be that if you look in the spec right now, you don't actually find that because we haven't introduced it into the actual spec document.
Yeah, I think the first iteration should be, but we are still have more discussion, and that's where we want to get input about what it makes sense. So I think another thing that we discussed that is still not yet in the spec, but it's about extensions. So if you have like vendor specific or source specific data, we could have specific headers or extensions where you introduce these and they are well defined as part of extensions of the CDEvents spec, so that if someone receives a generic build and want to do something with that, and there is the share metadata, you can do it. But if you all know that it's a Google Cloud build and there is extra data that you want to take advantage of, you can do if you want and if you need. And back to the point that you mentioned about being able to correlate events with or without links. So what we tried, like in the talk we made about this week, was to see how much we can correlate different events just using the subject. Like if I have a change, I have a change ID, and then I have a build. So what is the ID of the latest change included in the build? And that allows me to correlate things. And so that's one way of correlating events. The advantage for me for that approach is that it's easier, at least for initial implementation with different platforms, because you don't need to build in the source of the events the logic that correlates like whatever events you received in that triggered you with the event that you're generating, right? So if you want to have these links, then you need to have this logic into the platform. So you need to make more changes into the platform. And because we try to build POCs to show what we can do with CDEvents, so for this POC, first adapter layers around the different tools. So we don't really go into the tools and we are not able to create this connection. But I think I do agree with what Emil presented. That if you were able actually to produce these links, then you would have really powerful tool to create like this kind of traces more like systematically.
Yeah, and I can add there as well. I mean, if the steps in your pipeline or the actual activities there are triggered by events themselves, then you have the event ID or the ID in the source of that event that you're triggered by. So you can easily just include that as a reference in your own event when you send something. So that's very, very possible, I would say. But then, of course, if you have an orchestrated pipeline which doesn't really trigger each step on events, then you might need to find out where these links or what events to link to. And that's maybe a bit harder, but it's certainly doable. Yep.
I feel like if it's easy enough, if the data is there, embedding in a link is awesome. But I wouldn't want to lean too much on it, because I can imagine like a producer having to query an event store to get the right link before it can emit an event. That seems problematic to me. I want it to be able to just fire everything off, and with whatever context it happens to have.
Okay.
Yes. So
yeah, it might be problematic. So, and of course, we would need some event store to do that, and there are different solutions for that as well. And we use it very extensively, I would say, in this AFL protocol. It works fine, I would say there. So it's proven to work anyway. But we should discuss the details on how this should be done, of course.
just a quick thing, just to kind of like try to elaborate on that idea. It's like, ooh, interesting. Creating links. I think that it makes sense when you are like consuming like an event and then in a meeting next one. Like in that case, I mean, I think that it's pretty easy. You have enough information to not go and query some other things. But yeah, I can see also the scenarios where you don't have like that. Like you are just creating the event for the first time based on something that is happening that it's not creating another event, and then you will just need to just figure that out. But I think that but I'm leaning more on having that on the spec. So it would be a really nice thing to have there as like an optional field that we can use if we have that thing in there. And I'm wondering how kind of like that's going to materialize on the SDKs. How is that going to be? How are we going to make the life easier for developers just to create these links, kind of like in a more like an automated way? But I'm looking forward to see more of that in the future.
So let me just clarify a second, because what you just said helped me clarify my thought, which is that it's like, for example, a build that's triggered by a source change. We have a link already, right? The source change has a Git hash. The build was triggered off that. I would like to lean on that rather than trying to have the reference be through the CDEvents ID, which then just adds more burden onto all of the systems to create and reference that. So that's just as an example.
Yeah, and I think on that level, it's usually we have pretty solid things to go for already. It becomes perhaps a bit more of an issue when we talk about compositions of things. So you've done your build, you have your library or your application or whatever, but then you have multiple libraries and applications and you want to put those in one package, then there isn't really a universal like hash or something. You could use something like Perl, for instance, or PURL or whatever it's called, that provides some sort of identifier for it. And maybe that's something that we would do. I think that was a question or comment in one of the talks in the conference about using Perl for that. But yeah, so there are different ways of connecting things together, definitely. And and a lot of the work in the CDEvent specification is trying to find a balance between everyone's different use cases. But a good way of doing that is to hearing about everyone's different use cases. So it's really good that you're bringing this up.
Yeah, but I think when we are speccing out the links, we should make sure, well, we're not making mandatory to have the links, because there may be systems that don't want to send the links. And the other thing, I think your comment was really good also, Mauricio. What can we do in the SDKs to actually enable platforms to produce these links in a easier way? But yeah, so in this week talk, we presented the work that we'll be starting to do. We are building a POC, and we want to see if we are able to correlate with the spec how it is today, like from build to from code change down to deployment using the subjects, and then we'll, I guess, get a better feeling of what is missing there, if there are scenarios where we need more information that we cannot just get by the subjects.
Emil, could I ask you for a favor? If you want to, first you could stop the sharing, I think. If you could dig up the link to that issue where we're discussing links and post it in the chat, that would be nice for everyone who is attending us online. Because this is something that I've been discussing for some time, and trying to figure out different ways of connecting everything together. Does anyone want to provide any additional input on the links subjects? Otherwise, Emil will send a URL to the issue where we're discussing this. So it would be great both if we can get the opinions that were stated here today into that issue, and if anyone has further comments and ideas as well around that.
I was wondering if, Nicholas, if you feel we answered your question. I mean, I know it's a lot of open things that we are discussing, but is this a
the issue is perfect. Thanks for sharing that. I was just wondering, kind of on this subject as well, if there was some thought given to having a global, ID that relates to a collection of events, a bit like you have with tracing, you have trace IDs and span IDs. So span IDs would be event IDs, and a trace ID relates to a whole collection of these spans that relate to each other. So is there such a concept? Like how do you fetch all the events in I don't even know how to call it, in this process of, for example, someone merging some code and then that'll go all the way to deployment. Is there a concept to describe this entire process, and is there an ID for it?
So this would relate, I think, to what Emil mentioned before about a context ID, which I think, for instance,
that's the context.
Yeah. Peter, I'm wondering, should we mention the context database things that we have been... So, like, among the work that Peter and I are working on is like a pipeline framework, basically. And what Andrea mentioned before, it's a burden on existing services to have to carry through information from incoming events to outgoing events. Because however that data transfer happens inside the application, if we want to be able to do those links, it has to either go through the application as a whole, or it has to be supported from the outside. And what Piret and I have been discussing is something we call a context database, where if the application can just do one thing through the entire flow, which would then be a context ID, which again, things like Captain and other services already have, then it would be quite trivial to add an external service where, for instance, the incoming event wouldn't just be sent to the application, it could also be put in this context database with that context as key. So that when, for instance, the SDK even in the outgoing scenario wants to send links, then potentially you could, instead of the sender telling the SDK what those outgoing links should be, the sender can just say, please go and look up what those outgoing links should be from the context database. So then the SDK, when it receives the event, could update the context database, and it could also use it again when it sends the event. I think there's a lot of complexities to that to actually make it work. But I believe, Mauricio, on your comment, how can the SDK help? Then maybe that is something that the SDK could do to avoid having to transport that data throughout the application that receives and sends the event, but having the SDK take care of that instead.
Yeah, I think that like having something like that, it sounds more like we will need to have like a hook point for external systems on the SDK, like that you can go and consume data that it's going to help you to do something with the events, more than having something very specific to context. For context, I'm guessing that we will just need another attribute somewhere that allows you to reference that. So then you can use that for connecting to systems. Yeah, definitely that's where like the SDK plays a very important role in making life of developers easier and kind of like enriching the information that you already have with external systems.
Yeah.
There are different integration patterns to solve problems like that. So I'm really, I think that like that's kind of like where we should focus on maybe the APIs for these systems and maybe defining into the spec what the context is and where context can be created or something like that.
Yeah.
For the use cases.
Exactly, for how long they live and what they contextualize, so to say.
Yeah.
Yes. Any more thoughts?
Yeah, and to that as well, if we would use contexts rather than links in some scenarios, then that means that the producer of the event needs to include these context IDs somehow in the events, and that also means then that it would be the burden to the producer to understand how would any consumer of the event I'm sending want to relate this to anything else in the whole system. And how can a producer know that when sending an event? It could be that sometime far in the future, someone wants to relate things to each other, but the producer couldn't, of course, know. And as well, that all the producers of events in the system couldn't know what some consumer would like to see. So that's one, I would say, one quite strong drawback with just having these contexts or spans, if you like to call them that. That's common in traceability tools or tracing tools.
Yeah, it would put a higher burden on the receiver to know what to do with that context. It's true.
Yeah, and the producers need to know when to include a certain context and what contexts to include to be able to fulfill any consumer's need.
Yes. Any more on this topic? Nice. It's been a really good discussion. Do you have any last words on this topic, Andrea, before we move to the next one?
No, just one. We have this notes document. I put a link into the chat, but I'm not very good at taking notes while I'm thinking about something or talking. So what I'll do, we are recording this, so I'll go through the recording after this session and make sure we have consolidated the notes and we have all the inputs and create the issues for the spec based on the discussion that we have, so that we capture all the points that were discussed today.
Nice. Then I think, Maurizio, you had a topic you wanted to bring up.
Yeah, I think this is great, because I do believe that this is part of our kind of like roadmap, but I think that my topic was roadmap and focus, right? Like, what are we going to focus like the group until the end of the year, and kind of like how the roadmap would look like for version 1.0.
Yes. So, Andrea, you've been working on a roadmap. I feel so well prepared.
Yeah.
So we have a roadmap in our GitHub project, which hopefully we can get Andrea to show in a second here. I think we call it for version, well, we have both for version 1.0, but more urgently for version 0.1, so to say. What we would like to have before we take the next step, so to say.
Right. Okay. So I'm not sure if this is readable. So these are things that we have been working on. But this is what we try to capture here, basically the minimum set of things that we want to do to be able to say, okay, we have the first 0.1 release of the specification, right? So these are and we have things like defining a schema for the CDEvents body. So we have a PR app to start defining the schema and how it will look like. We had some interesting conversation this week as well. I think, Nicolas, I was talking to a colleague of yours about, he gave us some, where is the, yeah, he gave me some input about
the DC. Was it the DC?
Ben?
The colleague.
Yeah,
Oh,
it was
never
Ben
mind.
something.
Ben Powell.
Oh, Ben. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
He's 19.
Yeah, it was basically, for instance, telling me that for his perspective, it would be important to have like all the part of the payload that we have in the all the part of the payload that is specific to CDEvents under like a dedicated entry, maybe having a metadata entry, so that it's easy then if you're producing this, if you're an event producer and you want to have your own payload added into the events, it's easy to have a clear separation between what is the part of the CDEvents and what is, separate basically. And so, yeah, so we'll keep iterating on these. And if you have any specific input on this item, and yeah, let us know. I mean, we will basically continue to iterate on these and until we are satisfied with it, and that will define how the events look like in the 0.1 version. With some discussion on how we using the subject, and that's also related to what we discussed today, and we want to finalize that. It's in progress. We need to do some work in expanding the documentation the spec for several of the different buckets of events that we have. Yeah, capture the key use cases in the primer document. I think we've done some of this, even if it's marked in to do, but clarify the usage of source. We've done some work on that as well. We had some good discussion on what a source look like, but I think it's important to have it in a way that then makes sense for people to say, okay, yeah, this is my source. So we want to make sure that we can capture different application types and specific instances. Like if my source is Argo CD, but I may have like 10 different instances of Argo CD running in different environments. So we have some proposal how we can codify that kind of information, and we need to finalize those. So these are kind of the spec part. And then for the SDK, we put as a minimum requirement to have the Go SDK finalized under the CDEvents GitHub org. So we have the Go SDK is hosted right now in the CDEvents GitHub repository. Since we created the CDEvents organization in GitHub, we want to migrate that. And we want to migrate, when we do this migration, we want it to be then compliant with all the decision that we have taken on the spec side of things. So this is the bare minimum set of things that we are targeting to say, okay, we can do a 0.1 release. But yeah, so if there are obvious things that seems to be missing, we can extend the scope. And I think this is a good discussion to have today. What is that is really needed before we can.
Yeah, so I've been thinking about that, and also looking at the 4Keys project. I think that we need more focus on the at the event level, right? To say, okay, we want to make sure that we cover these events first, and then we expand on the use cases. I think that the advantage of having something like the 4Keys projects is that you already solved the problem, so you kind of know what information is needed for at least the DORA metrics. Making the DORA metrics kind of like priority for the group, I think that it might be kind of like our light at the end of the tunnel. Like, okay, if we manage to get the DORA metrics implemented with this, then we are in a very good position, right? Like maybe that's 1.0, not 0.1. But I think that we need to have that plan until 1.0 and the focus for 1.0. So we just keep cracking on that, right?
Yeah.
If that sounds like a good idea, we should definitely spend some time trying to define exactly what that means and the steps, in the middle.
But I think having like initial version of the POC that covers the DevOps metrics, yeah, might be a good target for 0.1 even. I think because maybe. Yeah, that kind of work drives really making sure that we have sense in the. Yeah, sorry.
I'll just mention that tentatively, we would love to be that POC, and I know you've done some work. Maybe we could, share knowledge on that. But I'm already planning to spend some time creating a POC within 4Keys that consumes CDEvents. So we kind of come at this from both sides.
Oh, that's really cool. Yeah, we should definitely then collaborate on that. And yeah, so as you work on your POC, and you will find missing bits and pieces here and there, so we can make sure that then we develop the spec in a way that enables fulfilling that use case, because at the end it's like really one of the two core use cases like we said in the beginning that we want to have. Cool. Another thing that I realize now it's not covered in the roadmap, and it's another aspect that we were discussing with Ben the other day, is about versioning, which is something that we should probably have an initial idea about when we do initial version, because so far we had we had some discussion about it. We have like a specification wide version that is already in the spec. But we had some discussion in the beginning also about having version specific version numbers. Event specific version numbers, sorry. Which adds complexity, but also flexibility. So we need to clarify a little bit how it is going to do. Like when we add a new type of event, do we make a new full spec version, minor or major rules lined out for this before I think we do, so that they don't then go break expectations. My expectation is that in the beginning there will be changes happening in the events. Obviously, we'll try to make non-breaking changes, but we may have to increment on the version of the events. And then, as we go forwards, hopefully then it will not change that often anymore. But we will have new events coming in, expanding the context and so on. I don't know, does anyone have any comment or questions on the versioning side of things? Any discussion we can have on that? Otherwise, or any other aspect that people feels like we should cover for the 0.1? Let me check if there is anything in the chat.
Maybe like on the SDK side of things, just trying to find out if we can just get community members to help us to build other languages as well. And definitely we need kind of like a working group on kind of like creating the specs for the SDKs as well, and some kind of like TCK, like test kit for testing that the SDKs are doing what they are supposed to be doing. The 4 keys is built on Python. So we don't have a Python SDK, and that's maybe the right excuse for us to just test that thing. So maybe, I think that part of the SDK work is making sure that we understand the shape of it, the requirements, and also kind of how are we going to test that the SDKs are doing kind of like an uniform thing. And we can rely basically on the Cloud Events SDKs that are a little bit more, are pretty complex in very different ways, but at least just follow up on that and think about extending those SDKs in a way.
So Cloud Event has SDKs in a whole lot of different languages, as far as I'm aware. And since, depending on how you look at it, CDEvents is either a pretty thin layer on top of Cloud Events, basically using Cloud Event attribute to send more data. Or, as Mauricio said, we want to make the SDKs provide a really good user experience for sending CDEvents and receiving CDEvents, and then they would gradually become more complex as they provide more value. But to just create a simple SDK that just is able to send a few different CDEvents or even receive some, I don't think that is too complex, in my view. There is some discussions we had earlier, like, to what extent do we want SDKs in different languages to be similar enough so that people can move between SDKs pretty easily, and such questions. And those are very much still open or up for discussions. And on that topic, I think the way the CDEvent project works today is, unfortunately, we don't really have enough time to keep all parallel tracks moving at the same time. So the way things move forward is for someone to find a bit of time or a bit of energy or a bit of passion for some specific topic and then drive that. And the other people in the community will typically react to that passion and join for the discussion in the subject, and then that goes on for a while. So it's definitely not the case that anyone needs to get approval for some discussion or get approval for some topic. Just come in the GitHub project and drive that discussion for a while, and you will see things happening. So something I think we should strive to become a bit better at is to making sure that discussions actually reach a decision, which is always difficult. But please, anyone who has some passion for some topic, just come in and start posting, and people will respond to that. Yes. So Mauricio, did you have anything else you wanted to discuss around roadmaps?
That's good. Like, just to make sure we focus on stuff, basically, and that we can just. I think that I'm a very practical person, so if we focus on implementation and making sure that, like, if we all agree that the DORA metrics are the thing that we should be focusing on, then let's just do that. Let's make sure that we get something that pushes us closer to that.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I guess that like what we can do like in the regular meetings is just do more planning about how do we get there, because it feels like a lot of work, but I think that we can be very strategic on what do we do first and how do we move forward there. So
Yes.
Yeah.
If I don't misremember, I think Matthias, who is part of the CDEvents project, actually did quite a bit of work around 4 keys as one of our earlier proof of concepts. He's not in the meeting today, as far as I know, but definitely we should sync up with him because, yeah, he's done a lot of thinking around it.
perfect. Yeah, that sounds good.
Yes. So, for those of you who weren't here in the introduction, the way we're running this community summit today is anyone who has anything they would like to discuss, some topics, some questions, or anything like that, just grab a microphone and state your business, or those online, just unmute and state your business. So this is a recorded virtual event, so everyone is aware. And the plan is not to have much of a plan. Yes.
Yeah, I just wanted to finish by mentioning, I mean, this is the first POC we implemented where we have Tecton and Captain. And I think there are variation of these where we switch some of these tools with Jenkins or Spinnaker. But yeah, basically using a cloud events broker to transport CD events and having like platforms talking to each other through CD events. But then going south in this, we only had like a cloud events player to show the events, what is going on. But I think it's important really then that we focus on the DevOps metrics POC now, because we can further develop this side of things. And one of the things that we were also chatting with Mauricio is that it would be nice to have a way to visualize what is going on in terms of events. I mean, one thing can be the 4 keys dashboard but it's a very aggregated view already, but even something that allows you to see the events coming through in a graphical way, maybe using JavaScript or some. So yeah, if someone has a passion about this kind of front-end technology and wants to contribute to this kind of project, feel free to reach out. But yeah, we're looking, and we'll find someone anyways that we'll make sure we find someone that can help us building that part, so we can, yeah.
Since you mentioned Spinnaker, I think there is a QR for each Spinnaker.
Yeah, exactly. That's why I mentioned. Yeah, and it's start building a POC and people take it and then they made small variation and add the other tool and to see how this develops.
I have a question actually on this subject. So when we're talking about metrics and things like that, to what extent should we talk more to the open telemetry team or that project? So I think that is I know not that much about it. It's more about tracing, I think. But it seems like there would be not zero overlap between what we are trying to achieve and what they are trying to achieve. I'm not sure, it's not specifically to Andrea, but if anyone has input on that.
I heard a talk from an open telemetry, I think it was on Tuesday on CDEcon now, where the presenter, I don't remember his name, but the presenter mentioned actually CDEvents in the end of his talk as something that could be interesting to interoperate with. And for sure, I think we should see an interoperability between OpenTelemetry and CDEvents instead of making them clash, so to say. So one of them could reference the other or vice versa. That's how I see it. I don't think that CDEvents would fulfill any OpenTelemetry use case and vice versa, not either. So we should combine our forces, I think.
Somehow we could use, so there's a concept called either follow my commit or follow your commit, or depending on what company you happen to be looking at it from. I think Ericsson probably invented it first, but basically it's a visual way to track what has happened to your code commit all the way from when you merged it or even created a pull request for it to final release of possibly multiple products. And their CDEvents, in my view, would have the responsibility of providing the data for that view. But if you sort of click one of those boxes, like what happened inside my build, for instance, then OpenTelemetry, I guess, would take over to show exactly how long different Maven goals took in the different NPM build steps and what else you have. So there may be like some sort of layering going on. But then, of course, for that, I'm able to click a box that is produced by CDEvents and then get to OpenTelemetry. There has to be some sort of link between those using common naming or common IDs or something like that, so that you can build such a dashboard. Would that, Emil, be in line with what you were thinking?
Yeah, exactly. And that's actually how we've discussed it recently in Ericsson as well. I don't think we use OpenTelemetry as such yet in the use case I'm thinking of, but in similar use cases where we actually have metrics sent as well, we say that we should refer from the events to those metrics instead of vice versa. So it totally makes sense to have the more detailed view for certain subparts of your pipeline in those metrics sent through OpenTelemetry, for example. And then have the overall flow or pipeline, end-to-end pipeline, so to say, through these CDEvents instead. That could be a way to combine them, at least, if you would like to combine them.
Yes.
I was wondering if this would be a good time to take a short break.
I think so.
Maybe start like a new discussion, or what people think about.
So do we do 10, 15, or 20 minutes? What's reasonable? It's 10:20 now.
Maybe 10 minutes.
Yes. So yeah, and feel free to come grab anyone of us or each other during the break, and we'll start back up in 10 minutes.
Okay, let's start 10 minutes from now.
Okay.
And BigQuery. Yeah, I was thinking of doing stuff and replacing it with basically that we have and we want to medium system. That's like what I'm thinking for the new architecture, we need to write it natively. And if we're processing it, we have rather than create kind of or keeping it as a job. That's a good one. All right. Good question. I don't know if anyone else is interested, so I'll raise it just to you. Hey, hear me out. I know the answer is probably no way, dude. That's not how this works. But there is a use case, which is incident, right? When an incident is created, we usually don't know any like root cause information, and then we find that out and then we amend that to the information about the incident.
So the answer there is yes, in the sense that we both about this, that you will not need but you want like any specific event, so you will need a new event ID. But it can be about the same incident, and then you need to make sure that we have enough information in those kind of incident events to be able to understand on the receiving side that they're actually the same thing.
Right. In that case, it would definitely be a case for like link, having a hard link and saying, this is root cause information for
this specific incident that I have previously declared. I mean, you could have like a matrix or Prometheus or whatever user ticket sending information. There is an incident. Get all this information, and then you could have something that is doing automatic remediation. You could have a human that is actually done some root cause analysis, or you could have an AI that scrubs all the data and root cause analysis for you, and then send another event.
Well, you know, I'm looking to support relatively traditional ways of operating where it's usually, you know, the incident gets declared, you know, it's like it's waiting to be in a Jira or something. And then later on, someone comes along and traces it. There's an interesting thing going on in the metrics thing of like, oh, do we just assume the last event is considered the cause of this incident? And increasingly, yes, that's what we're doing. So it's obviously.
Yeah. Well, it depends also on how often you're deploying, and yeah, I mean the code change the code of how you have like 10 deployments and then you have an incident that that's not
So we also know that 70% of outages are caused by changes to code. Pretty good guess that it's because you.
okay.
Like people love to talk about like cyber cuts and whatever. That's just so rare compared to you wrote it because you wrote it back. That's what
announcements, like, yeah, may not be precise, kind of like a it's not, something went wrong. And also, whatever, that we expect, that makes a lot of sense. And then you look at the normal something happens, let's find out what caused it. Kind of, well, like,
yeah, and you know, that occurs to me that deployment as an event also potentially needs to be updated. Four keys actually models everything as point time deployment, but we are well aware that that is not rich enough to allow people to do things. So, you know, in deployment, and my metadata says, you know, percent rolled out 1. Well, obviously that's not forever. So we need to be out.
Yeah, I was very thinking about that, but yeah, so we don't have anything today to model that, but immediately, then, yeah, it's a thing now, so it's, I mean, we feel we're working in the native and CDEvents, and the new version.
I don't have my computer, can you select this like in my I couldn't test it.
Yeah.
I put the text there.
So the announcement could be the same.
Yeah, if you go to CDF top GitHub repo, sure, not that one. CDF GitHub top repo.
My first reaction is, of course, this is a pen going into this. Like, we can get information later. I think
Yeah.
One people
Yeah.
after the translation is that link from the.
I know that you're having an update about something that happened earlier.
Go to top.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this, you know, for my part, this is the kind of work that we want to do. Is to, I think there was some implications earlier about like, well, how much do we want to burden the receivers, right, with information? Like, for our sake, we want as raw as much of it as we can, and then you want to do the work of understanding all of those pieces of the deployment, and creating context, and then comparing them across. Certainly, you can have an intermediate level, like sort of aggregation service, and then dashboard on top of it. Right now, we're both for specific context.
Yeah, yeah, and my hope is that like when we have the events, some of the work that we're doing for keys may be like more general purpose, not only to put data into like but also more general views, because then if all the different platforms they speak this language, and if you're doing some aggregation on the data, then you're supposed to water. So then it becomes easier to maintain this kind of project because there's not Google and this maintaining this project. Yeah, I mean, wider community. Like,
The one thing that I would do to let sort of declare, and with, be responsible with the community is defining the kind of data transform that says, how does that dashboard as our work is going on? We have scientists who do this. All of the other bits are like, how does someone else figure out, how do we get data from here to there? How do we aggregate it together? How do we correlate? We'll contribute, but I don't want to, I want to do.
Yeah.
And then I want to publicly publish our understanding of how the data is that's the part around. I want that source of truth to be on the project. So your proof of concept work on where do I see that? How technical are your queries to my queries? And my queries are messy as hell, so I know the question.
I don't have queries yet, so and now the work is done on like thinking about the spec, which goes to you to introduce the spec on the board. So that's as far as we got from this conference. But yeah, so we can compare queries as we go through that. So I will be working on that after this conference.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if Mauricio saw this, how it looked for our thing. Our architecture is a little light because we sort of conflate normal CDEvent sources and producing a dashboard out there. We use we have a bunch of statements and stuff. We use that source.
Yeah.
So what I want to do is extract that out and say step one, more like a GTM step one, rationalize everything to
Okay, we're just wrapping up some conversations locally here in the room.
And then step two is based on
Okay. That was a great paper you had. It was very loud in the conference. I woke up as well.
That's good. That's good.
So I've almost been free. I saw the presentation.
She's focused more now on Aggregation. So probably is me or someone else has she will help them and she's still looking at data. Myself, Roger, and one and other 10 people. But yeah, the thing is, and I say this, going to stupid examples, it's basically rewrite it. And then I want to change the data and ingestion process to align around CDEvents and have more linear processing. So then putting all that together, where the and plus this, but she
Yeah, but I would say that collaboration growing into this place, you're able to roll out.
Okay. Let's see if we can get back up again.
You and I have shared a bucket of events. We said, okay, you know, like the data set, or like this is what we can do. Try to find out what clients have. We believe that it's sufficient, necessary.
So, yeah, we're back in the room again. I'll get Andrea mic'd up as well. Did I upload the wrong file? Where did my browser go? That's wrong. So, does anyone have any favorite topic they would like to discuss next? So before the break, we discussed links, we discussed the roadmap, and we discussed a little bit about source and the subject and other things like that. I have one topic that I think may be interesting. Unfortunately, I seem to have uploaded a very wrong file for that. I will need to fix that pretty quickly, which is about descriptive versus prescriptive events, which has been a little bit of a hot topic partly. Just give me a second to fix this. I have prepared a little introduction on what that would mean or how that would work.
Was anything in the CDEvents? Comment there.
Just from me, but that's I sent the wrong thing anyway.
Thing you there.
Okay. Yeah. So could you open that folder and help me load the PDF there? Yes. That's still not the same one though. It's not how it looks in the browser.
Is it this
yeah,
branch?
no, if you scroll down, you will see that it starts with a blank page and then it has this. But when you open it, it has entirely different content, which is weird to me.
Okay, let's do like this. And then go to loads. Is that it?
No, that's not how it looks in the browser. It's some caching issue somewhere.
I have no.
I can just show it from here. That's fine. This is some GitHub desktop thing. I don't know, but.
No.
Okay, I'll show it from here. So right now, the CDEvents project mainly consists what we would call descriptive events. These are events that describe something that has happened. We could also introduce prescriptive events. So these would be more like commands saying that something should happen. And if we take two examples, one mainly descriptive and one with some prescriptive elements, we can say that we start with some change being merged somewhere. These would both be descriptive events because they're describing something that has happened, which is a change being merged. In both these cases, in the scenario I have, some orchestrator will pick up that event and decide to do something. In the descriptive setup...
Sorry, Eric, are you sharing something, Eric? Or, sorry.
I thought I was, but maybe I'm not.
Oh, I can see the sharing at least.
Thank you
I
for...
thought we were talking.
No, that's good. Yes.
Yeah.
So just to
Perfect.
recap
Yeah,
quickly
thanks.
then. So in both cases, we had a change being merged and some orchestrator picking that up. So, and thus far again, everything is descriptive, indicated by the purple boxes, because these are things that has happened. In a more pure descriptive setup, the orchestrator would say, okay, that has happened, so now I will do this. So it has some opinion on what to do next. Sorry. Yes, so it has an opinion on what to do next, and it will go ahead and do that. So this could, for instance, be invoking an external tool or first declaring that it starts the pipeline, then invoking some external tool to, for instance, build an artifact, and then being done again. So every event that is sent in this chain is descriptive. It just declares something that has happened. In a prescriptive setup, the orchestrator could say, okay, that happened, then I will request this. So in this case, the first orchestrator here doesn't know what, or how, I should say, how to do something. It knows that something needs to happen, but it doesn't know how to do it or where it should be done. So it just translates this incoming event to saying that something should happen, and in this case, some pipeline should be run. This would then be picked up by some other orchestrator, some orchestrator that actually has the knowledge on how to do what needs to be done. And then this orchestrator would then be sending the events. Apparently I missed the last picture. I can show it here instead. Actually, this one. So that second orchestrator would then be invoking the pipeline, which I missed somehow. There we go. Yes, so it would be invoking a pipeline. What this means, I would say, is that in the first orchestrator, that orchestrator knows what to do, where to do it, and how to do it. So it owns the flow, the whole flow. In the second setup, the first orchestrator only knows what to do. And it just puts that information about what to do in an event, and it sends that out. And then that gets picked up by some other orchestrator who actually knows where to do and how to do. Yes, we've had a little bit of discussion on this in the CDEvents group. It's not at all obvious to us that we should have these kind of prescriptive or command events. There are some POCs, I think mainly the one that Maurizio has been working on, where he needed those type of events to tie things together. You could potentially introduce quite interesting routing of events so that the orchestrator in the beginning just, this needs to happen. But again, it doesn't know where that needs to happen. Routing things on the way, that causes things to happen where they actually can. But yeah, I wanted to bring this up as a discussion that we're having. And basically, I'm interested in any opinions or pitfalls or benefits or in of what we're trying to do. Does anyone have anything they would like to bring to the table on this topic right now? Yeah. There's a button in the bottom. Yeah, you see it.
Hello, my name is Brandon. I work for Amaze.io. We have an open source build whole platform on Kubernetes called Lagoon, and we are basically doing the prescriptive thing right now. Obviously, we don't use CDEvents, so we would, if you have that available, we would pick that path if we went with CDEvents.
Could you describe a little how prescriptive events, just to give us the rest of us some introduction?
Yeah, essentially we have a like core product that like receives like a GitHub webhook notification, and it kind of figures out, okay, well that matches to a customer's project, but then it sends another event to the Kubernetes cluster where that project could possibly be deployed. And there's another, remote system running in that cluster that can pick up the event and then actually do the build and do whatever's needed. And then it communicates back to the core to say, here's the status, it's running, it's complete, it's done, here's the routes, et cetera, et cetera.
In this setup, is the core aware that there is a cluster somewhere, or does it just send out an event hoping that someone will listen, basically, or how is that set up?
It is aware of the clusters that exist and the initial this project potentially can be deployed like in this cluster or this cluster, and then the clusters figure out, well, if it's production, then don't worry about it. If it's development, do it here. So there is some smarts and some descriptive stuff, but also some prescriptive stuff.
Because it brings an interesting question to the table, which Pirette, you were discussing yesterday. Like in the scenario where the sender doesn't know who will pick that up, interesting things happen if whoever should pick that up happens not to be listening right now. Like it's down or there's some network issue or something, because the in this setup, at least, the first orchestrator, the one sending the event, has no responsibility of making sure someone actually does anything with that event. It just sent it. This should happen. So, would we need to introduce a pipeline run request acknowledged event so that someone can say, okay, someone is picking this up? Probably that's not something that we should do. Do we need an event store like what they have in Eiffel, for instance, if the second orchestrator has been down for some time or hasn't been started yet, and then it comes up and would like to see, what did I miss? What could I do that I haven't done? And those kind of issues. But I guess in your use case, you wouldn't, you know what clusters you have, so you pretty much send. Do you send a directed event saying it should go exactly here, or do you send an event with enough information so that different parties know if they should act on it or not?
It's probably a mix of that. It's not, we don't fully direct things from core, but it doesn't send everything to everybody.
I'm not sure, Andrea or Emil. Yeah, Pirette has a comment.
I think that one thing that could be done to track who has acted upon an event is if we really would store the events that have happened, to have a field or a possibility to add a list of to register components that actually have taken actions that were based on that event. So, for example, if we have a pipeline run requested and we only want one orchestrator to react upon that, then once one orchestrator decides to act upon that request, it can just add, I am going to act upon that, I promise that. So that when another orchestrator, in a case where you have several, would wake up and also try to act upon that request, would see, okay, this is a case where not two orchestrators should not be acting on the same event. Could be one thing to consider.
I think that I'm not super versed with that, but I think some message bus scenarios, you could have a bus where or a queue basically, where a consumer would go and say, I will take this message that now it's no longer available to anyone else. I'm sure there is also a way for a consumer to look at the event without sort of taking it. And then if they want to act on it, they can formally take it. And if they don't, they just sort of return it to the queue or don't take it out of the queue. So that would be a way to handle, to make sure that both to handle actually, to make sure that something does happen on this event, and also to deal with the fact that it might not be anyone who's ready to do this right now. So we need to store the event for a little time before we act on it.
Yeah, if you use a cloud router, like, I don't know, Knative eventing with Kafka implementation or some other storage implementation, then you can have subscriptions or triggers, basically. And if an event subscribes to a certain type of, if a consumer subscribes to a certain type of events, after events have been sent, it will not get the previous events. But if you have a subscriptions and then for some reason you're offline for a certain amount of time and then you come back online, you will get the events that were generated since your subscription existed. And yeah, you can have multiple ones. And we use that in one of the POCs, like when we have like the receiving side getting the events, and also we have like the cloud events viewer getting all the events, so that like a more broad subscription, so that you can show all the events that are coming through. And yeah. So in terms of prescriptive and descriptive, I don't know if it's something that I wanted to say is that at least in terms of subjects or like kind of the basic data structure that we have, certainly it's something that might be useful for prescriptive type of event to reuse where it makes sense. But yeah, I don't know if that would be in there, but because we basically define a schema to reason about changes, builds, tests, and so forth. When you request something, you have less information, I guess, about that. But yeah, we can still use whatever it's applicable in those type of prescriptive events.
So two things that have been brought up in earlier discussions on this is, if you look at the cloud event specification, which I think Matthias in the team did, they seem to favor descriptive events, saying that the cloud events isn't really meant to be used as like sending commands. It's more intended to be used for showing what has happened. And a second thing, which I think is interesting outside of just this concept, is what would it mean to say that you're compatible with CD events? If we introduce prescriptive events, I don't think you should be forced to be supporting receiving prescriptive events to be able to say, I am compatible with CD events. There should be some smaller subset saying, yeah, I send the descriptive events that I should based on what I'm doing. And that should perhaps be enough. But it gets tricky. Yes, let's see if we can get a mic over to you.
I'll just mention, I don't know, whatever. I just mentioned that representing kind of the receivers end of this spectrum. I wouldn't want those prescriptive events. That's just noise. I did say earlier I want all the data, but I don't want those. So yeah, that sounds great for internal to a system, but then to be compatible, from my perspective, you would only need to emit those descriptive ones.
Yes, so the comment was basically that for someone who is more interested in like calculating metrics and showing status, obviously, perhaps the prescriptive events would just be noise. They would not add anything. You're only interested in what has actually happened, because that is what will contribute to the metrics. So yeah, definitely listening to prescriptive events shouldn't be the minimum bar for saying that you're compatible with CD events. I would absolutely agree with that. Yes, I think Emil, I'm not sure if you have any comments on this subject from your side.
Yeah, I'm very much in favor of descriptive events, but I'm trying to formulate why I am. I mean, it in my mind at least, it makes it easier to create a decoupled system, and when the producers don't need to know, the producers of an event don't need to know what happens downstream of me. So, for example, if I create an artifact, if I build something, I don't need to know all the kinds of tests that will be run in parallel when I build this artifact, or all kinds of deployments that will happen. Or, I mean, I shouldn't need to know all those things. So I think it makes it a lot easier to send events and to create the spec itself if all events sent are just saying what has happened and not saying, what do I expect should happen next? And for sure, for the metrics use case, there's no reason at all for prescriptive events. And if there would be both descriptive and prescriptive events in this case, for example, triggering a pipeline, which of those should then be listened to? I mean, say that a pipeline is triggered on a source change, for example. If it was descriptive, then only the source change event itself was listened to, and then the pipeline was started. If it is prescriptive, then in some way the source change event should itself contain information of what pipeline to start, if they should all be descriptive. Or if we should combine them, as you had here, with a pipeline requested, then what is the actual trigger of the pipeline being requested there? Is it the source change, or is it the pipeline requested event? So I think it makes it a bit harder to, as a consumer, to understand when does things happen in the pipeline, maybe. But I guess my main concern is on decoupling the systems and making the producers of the events not aware of what needs to happen downstream. But then, of course, there needs to be some overall system orchestrator somewhere saying that this that should have happened downstream didn't happen. So I need to see what is wrong with that service. It didn't kick off for some reason. But I guess that's a bit out of the scope of prescriptive descriptive, because it's interesting in either case. If you expect the pipeline to be run on a source change, doesn't really matter if there is some pipeline requested in between or not. You need to know that the orchestrator responsible of starting that pipeline actually did it, regardless of if there was a commanding event or not.
So I think the case is today, as you mentioned, Brad, that there are several tools in the CI/CD ecosystem that do use events internally to make things happen. I believe Captain is another example of those. They send out a request for something to happen, like a JMeter run or something similar, and then something else makes that happen. And maybe somehow this is more likely to be used inside an existing system, like what we've heard here. And if there isn't that much need to do things between systems using prescriptive events, then maybe that doesn't belong in the CDEvent specification. And it should instead be maybe a sibling to the CDEvent specification that would only deal with prescriptive events for mainly internal signaling inside systems. Or we simply don't include it in the CDEvent specification, and then each project would be up to themselves to define how those events should be sent. Because
I think it would make okay, go ahead.
No, I was going to agree with you. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, I go ahead. So yeah, I think maybe they should not be part of the core specifications, I'd say, but for sure they could be sent on the same message bus or broker or whatever you use. And I think it should be, you should make it possible to reference them from each other. So in that sense, it might make sense to make those kinds of events then extensions to the CDEvent specifications somehow, or plugins, or however you want to call it. So, but as I say, I would think that we shouldn't have them in the core spec so that consumers would expect them to be there. In general, consumers, but for course, as you say, in like an internal system, if you're the Captain use case, for example, they could add the Captain extensions, and then they could add some events that could happen in between them, in between the cloud, sorry, the CD events there. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think Captain is an interesting example, though, because I mean, it basically it's an orchestrator. I mean, with the shipyard file, wants to define what is supposed to happen, and what it does, it delegates to other system for doing it. So you can say, okay, I need to do a build now, and I'll send these events, and you can have another system taking it and say, okay, I'm doing this build, and then I send the context back with the result, and then the progress will continue. And so Captain is orchestrating this, so it actually goes through across systems. And in the initial POC that we built, we had like Tecton starting the workflow and then triggering Captain, but then Captain was triggering Tecton back through CDEvents. And we use descriptive events for doing this. But the thing is that you need some kind of layer always on the receiving side that receives the descriptive events, applies some logic. It could be some policies, some rules, some decisions, extracts the data, and then triggers the next thing. And how it triggers the next thing, it can be, it depends. It can be, if you have an API, it can be an API call directly in the system, or it could be, again, an event. And in that case, if you're using an event, it would have to be, in this case, a prescriptive event, because otherwise you end up in having another system that is, So, yeah, if you're sending a descriptive event, you pick it up, you apply some logic, and you want maybe multiple systems to react to it, then you could put this prescriptive event on a bus again, and then many will pick it up. But the problem with this approach is then how do you reconcile things? Because when you have this prescriptive event, normally you need to have, like you said, an acknowledgement back that the thing is finished. And if you have an undefined numbers of consumers of these events that will all have to acknowledge, how do you know that all of them finished? Or you need to have some kind of, you don't know how many of them will be there, for instance. And so it's really hard to have this kind of acknowledgement in this case.
And I think Emil brought up something important before. So even with descriptive events, if you want to take some action on descriptive events, some system somewhere needs to be able to answer the question, do I have enough next step? It could either be something very simple as soon as I have a change merged event, that is enough for me to take the next step because I'm going to build or run some unit tests or something. But there can definitely be scenarios where you need to grab. So there's the concept called Fanout and Fan-In, which I think has multiple definitions, unfortunately. I would describe it as, say that you make a release of something, like an internal release of an application. And then you want to include that application in a bigger package. But before that happens, you want to run a number of tests on it. So a typical example from the domain me and Piret working is in automotive is you make a release of some software for some computer in the car, and you want to do model testing, software testing, and hardware testing on that. And only when all those things have passed do you want to sort of let the next level use that component software. So you would then go to in a visualization tool that might look like you go to the first component release step, and then it branches out into 3 parallel tracks, where one goes to a model system testing tool, it finds the model for that application, it does some fancy testing on that, and then it releases a verdict on that. And the software downloads the software, downloads some simulator stuff, sets everything up, runs some tests. Hardware finds the correct hardware rig where this can be tested, installs the software on the actual computer, does some testing, and then releases it. And then you need those 3 events to come back in again. And that can be quite complex. And that is where something like links that Emil pointed to before can be used. Can we trace this back to the same originating release? Also, something like context could be used in this scenario where, okay, we need to make sure they have the same context because then they spawned from the same branch, or they just need to say, I am a test verdict for this version of this release. That is also sufficient to understand that they came from the same track. But what I'm getting at is that the logic for when we are ready to take the next step can be quite advanced. So that logic isn't, or for that specific use case, it's not at all simplified by having a prescriptive event, because the entity that sends the prescriptive event still needs to do all that logic. So I don't think prescriptive events reduce the complexity of using CD events. What it does allow you to do in a more standardized way is to split the complexity a bit. As I showed you before in the picture, you can have the box that waits for enough things to be available for it to say that we are ready to take the next step, and the box that actually takes the next step. Those can be different boxes. They could be anyway with some other type of internal signaling, but there wouldn't be any CD events in the middle, so to say. So at least I don't really know of any particular use case that would require prescriptive events as part of the CD event specification. But I do think it can have an impact on making some use cases a bit more standardized, perhaps, and a bit simpler, especially if we're talking about interoperability, which would mean that an orchestrator that knows that, okay, the next step is to make a Docker image of these libraries that we have now tested, that doesn't need to know who will create the Docker image. It just says, now we have some stuff ready for taking the next step. So Emil, in Eiffel, you have compositions pretty well defined. Would you see any use case for being able to say, okay, now I know that we have everything ready to put in a composition, but I don't know how to actually create the composition. So you send an event saying, everything is ready for this composition, please someone go ahead and create it. Yeah.
No, I mean, if I know that everything is ready, then I probably know what that is, so I can put it in this composition myself.
I'm thinking about if we take like a build tool that is good at putting stuff in a Docker image and releasing that Docker image to some repository, that build tool wouldn't, at least if it's like a standard build tool, it wouldn't have any opinion on what should go into the Docker image. That would be defined by some recipe, like a Docker file typically. And it also wouldn't be responsible for actually making sure that everything that needs to go into that Docker file is actually available somewhere. So someone still needs to sit and listen to say, okay, when do we have all the components that should go into this composition? When are they ready? When are they tested? When are they available for me to do something? And then that would either be an orchestrator, or it would be an orchestrator that either explicitly invokes the build tool to say, okay, I have verified that everything is available. You can now go ahead and start your build. Or the orchestrator could set an event saying, anyone who likes to build Docker images, I have now verified that everything is available, so anyone who wants it can now pick it up. But I guess that again boils back to like either explicitly invoking the build tool from the orchestrator or invoking it through a request or a command. But
yeah, and I also think still that it makes the systems more coupled if we have prescriptive events also in that case, because then the producer of the events, if say that the builder, then the consumer that will act on that request, if that all of a sudden needs another property sent to it in the event, then we need to update the producer of the event instead of putting the complete burden on the actual builder. That no, the only thing I get from the events are what has happened, and then I need to get everything else myself. So I think it makes it more decoupled in that way, even if such scenarios were using descriptive events instead.
Yeah, that's a fair point. I will go ahead and share my screen once more just to describe something that, so we built something that is conceptually similar to this in Volvo Cars. We had a lot of entities producing various types of events, like Garrett in this case mainly. What we had was, we called it a trigger system where you could basically write filters for events, where it said, anytime an event comes in that matches this filter, or anytime multiple events come in with the same context that match these filters, we invoke an HTTP, we make an HTTP request. And these would almost always go to some Jenkins server somewhere, which then started a job. And you could pick out parameters from the messages and put into that HTTP request. But then it's exactly as you said, Emil, whenever we needed some additional information in the Jenkins job, we would have to go and update the trigger to pick additional data out of the message to send in the HTTP request. What it did allow us was to not have a whole bunch of Jenkins instances listening on the event bus to figure out what to do. Not really prescriptive events, but definitely this setup where we had one requesting orchestrator and one performing orchestrator. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, it seems to me that the prescriptive has to happen, like in between two descriptive events. Some logic has to happen in the middle. And so the question is just, A, is it useful to standardize that as events? And B, is it useful for that to be in CDEvents? Is that what I'm
Yeah, I
getting?
think that summarizes this very nicely. As you say, between every event usually is some form of transformation of some sort, either a build or package or just a test runner, but something happens between the descriptive events. So
what would you say is the main advantage for having that kind of last mile as an event, as opposed to an API call, or is it to go? I don't know. But yeah, what would you say it's the main reason for that? I'm trying to.
I suppose it's just standardization, right? Like, I mean, because for us, we're already doing events eternally. They're just
okay.
They don't match anything in the world. Is it useful to have like standardized prescriptive events between like Tecton and all these other tools if nobody is actually interrupting between them? Like if they're only ever used internally, is it useful to standardize? I don't know. Or what, like once they're standardized, could you find what things appear that would make sense to be like, oh, well, since these two things are happening the same way, all of a sudden I see a new metric I could see, or like there's some new debugging thing or something. That stuff I'm not sure. But I guess that would be the biggest advantage, is it's now standardized. Like everybody's doing this internally anyway, but if now everybody's doing it the same way, maybe that's a pro.
I mean, one metric that you could definitely get out of that is how long does our stuff that we know should start, how long does that wait until it actually starts? Because you have the request and then you have the corresponding started event. It would be harder for an external observer to say, oh, since we got these 3 artifact published events, that means that some pipeline should start. Now we need to wait for that to actually start. It's much more complex in that sense. But I guess that metric could also be calculated by, in this, where you don't have events, or where you have events with acknowledgement, it could be calculated by the producer of the request, because it would then know how long did I wait until someone acknowledged this, they're actually starting. But it's if an external observer were to try to determine that, then they're having standardized request events would make that use case simpler, I think. Yes. Are there more thoughts or ideas on that topic, on the topic of prescriptive events?
Well, it feels to me like it still would make sense to standardize, like was your question. Trying to wrap my mind around it, I think it would be worth then having like a specific use case and see how would it look like to use a prescriptive events to trigger 2 or 3 different tools, and what the surface would look like what is the part that we can standardize to make this this possible. Yeah, I mean, if we had like standard for prescriptive events, in the way I am trying to figure it in my mind is like if you have like some filtering system like Eric was describing that allows you to get the descriptive events and take decisions, and then what you could do is then send a prescriptive events and saying, yeah, build this artifact now. And you would then send the same event regardless of whether you're asking Tecton or Jenkins or Shipwright or whatever system to do that.
Yeah, I mean, maybe one, well, and here's where like my lack of knowledge comes in. I don't know exactly what events you want to standardize, but for us, like internally, like we might want to say, create a prescriptive event that tells all of our clusters to do something, right? Like that, okay. You know, I don't know if, I can't think off the top of my head if that's like build related. So like maybe it wouldn't even be included in your list of events, but that would be a thing, that would be like a prescriptive event that we would say like, hey, go build the test suite like everywhere, like test all the clusters at once. Like maybe that's out of scope, but that would be the example that comes to mind immediately for me.
I think that would be in scope. So our four main buckets that we work with right now, we have the core, which is like pipeline things mainly, I think. Source code, continuous integration, and continuous deployment. And somewhere around continuous deployment might be at least tangentially related, or maybe continuous integration to what you're referring to. So yeah, builds and deployments and tests and all those things should be. And it's a good thing to think about as well is we definitely haven't, as far as I'm aware, we haven't limited ourselves to any particular scope for the long term. We have limited ourselves short term because I would say we tried, or I tried when I joined the CDEvents project to say, here are all my favorite events that I would like to have in the spec. And I spent some time describing all those. And the feedback I got was, these look really good, but not right now. We need to focus on something smaller to start with. And I think in hindsight, that makes a lot of sense because trying to go too broad, too fast is going to be messy. But I would say what you're describing sounds like it could be in scope for what we're aiming to do.
So do you have a spec, Brett, for the events that you use internally today, or a list of events or things like that we could? Okay.
No, it's definitely a read the code kind of documentation.
Oh, okay. I was wondering maybe for you or anyone working on the project to come to our SIG events meeting and maybe do a presentation about the type of interactions that you have, so we can try and capture that and see, maybe at least have starting with an issue to track the problem and the kind of use cases that you want to address. And then if you have the interest to maybe build a VOC or see how this would fit, do like analysis and see how this would fit on CDEvents. Yeah, so that we have like kind of an actionable next step to go forward. Because I think in general, I mean, so on descriptive events, but yeah, we could consider like a special or an extension or a group of events that you don't have to implement necessarily to be CDEvents compliant, but in general, I mean, CDEvents compliance is one of the topics that I think we need to refine in future, because we started creating these different phases of buckets because we expected that not every system will implement all the events, right? So if you have like an SCM system, it will send you changes about events about changes, but it will not send you events about deployments. So we need to have kind of profile of compliance. Say, okay, I'm compliant with CDEvents, this part of CDEvents. So it could be another group, for instance, of events you can be compliant with.
Yes, so Mauricio, we've been discussing one of your favorite topics, descriptive versus prescriptive events for a while. Yeah, and to summarize the discussion, I would say, yeah, it's a lot of differing opinions in the rooms where we've been discussing whether that is something that we should standardize, and if so, if we should have it in an extension or something similar. And also in what use cases prescriptive events versus just internal signaling in some framework would make more more sense. I guess it's hard for you, since you weren't here for most of the discussion, if you want to give some thoughts on your side on descriptive versus prescriptive before we.
Yeah, so I think that like the main reason why that's my favorite topic is that like when I'm building integrations, sometimes I just need to trigger stuff based on the things that are happening. I think that if we look it from more like the metrics point of view, you are just always collecting events. You can react to those events and then do things, but writing the mapping between like an environment was created and then I need to deploy, it's something that you will need to do in a custom way all the time. So my question and the reason why I brought this topic was that when building these integrations, that's kind of where I was spending the most time on. And I thought, okay, this might be something that we can also investigate into providing some kind of solution, or at least maybe the result is like that what we need to do is we create some guidelines, or at least show some use cases so developers adopting CD events, they know that they are going to face that, and then how they can tackle the problem when it pops up. It feels like a problem. Maybe it's not a problem, but it's where people will need to write code, and writing code is usually a problem.
So I will share again just to show Maurizio to see if he agrees. I presented it something like this. So in the descriptive or purely descriptive case, you would have some sort of orchestrator that knows both what to do and where and how to do it. And this could then do internal signaling or however that would work, but it doesn't need to request anything from anyone. Whereas in a prescriptive case, you could have one orchestrator that realizes, okay, now it's time to do something. I don't know how to do it. I just know that it needs to be done. And then it sends a request, and some other one picks that up and say, okay, I know that I should do it, and I know how to do it. So that would then go ahead and run something. So having prescriptive events, or as you said, guidelines, would help people who want to split things up in this way or some other way. And a big orchestrator box that knows all of it. Yes, but as we discussed, I don't think we want orchestrators to have to be able to react to prescriptive events to claim that they are, as Andrea put it, CD events compliant, because that puts quite a lot of burden on these orchestrators to not only emit events, but also listen to events and figure out how to acknowledge if they need to that they are going to do something, or figure out if they should react on that event. So there's a lot of interesting things to discuss there as well. And there is an issue for this in our GitHub project, which I will put a link to in the chat in a second. So yeah. And as I mentioned in the beginning, one of the major ways things happen in this project is people popping into discussions and issues and giving their thoughts and feedback and putting through proposals.
Eric, I think that one of the things that we might need to discuss here, and maybe you already discussed this, but this is pretty related with the end of my presentation the other day, like yesterday. Was it yesterday? No, 2 days ago.
2 days ago.
Which basically was all about that. It's like, how do we build integrations with these things, right? Like it might be kind of like just going into that function-based approach and assuming that every producer is more like an event producer. And then we would just need to do some mapping to CD events. So I think that like if we analyze the context in where we are going to use these events and what people will be doing with these events, will put us in that scenario where maybe that orchestrator, what it is, first of all, it's like we need to have something that it's not an orchestrator, but like more like a transformation thing between cloud events and CD events. And then what do we do with the CD events is just up to us, right? Like then we let the one picking up cloud events decide how they will do the integrations, and that might be good. But I guess that like looking into that orchestrator, I think that it will be a wrong assumption to think that we will have one for CD events without like taking into account all the other cloud events that already exist, right? Like we will live in this environment where we will have CD events and normal cloud events, all mixed in some way.
And that I think is or for me, it's the perfect segue of something that I wanted to discuss as well, which is how do we make the world CD events compliant? Because I think you, Maurizio, brought up two options. They're not conflicting options. I think we will need to go for both. One is actively working with existing projects to make sure that they emit CD events as part of their core functionality. And some projects we will definitely be able to do that, and I think we can support in a good way, especially by building really good SDKs for it. But then there are projects that today emit either cloud events or just any other type of events, or like what we did in Volvo Cars for Artifactory way back when was we found a REST API endpoint that we could poll to see what the latest change is in a repository. And whenever that was some file that we were interested in, we emitted an event, and someone could go react to that. And that is also something that we could do to help make the wider community more CDEvents compliant, is by providing, you call it translators, I think that's a good name, or yeah, like polling and emitting things wherever that is needed as well. So there, I think there is I was going to say infinite amount of work that could be done to just step by step make the world more compliant. But yeah,
I think, I mean, those kind of adapters can help us, like in building initial integrations and you know, to make a POC or show things that can be done. But I would expect eventually, if we are able to produce enough value with CD events, it will be just systems that want to produce CD events or support it natively because they get value out of it. So it will never be like, okay, we as a project go and say, okay, you have to do CD events because, yeah, okay, we should get to a place where people wants to use CD events, because if they do, then there is a return that is valuable enough for them to do. But yeah, to get there, there is all this intermediate phase, and I think through this intermediate phase, we'll have to, you know, work with this adapters and for building POCs. But I'm not sure I would like the CDEvents community as a community to maintain these kind of adapters to become like production-ready piece of software that we maintain. I would rather us work in like refining the spec and working with the communities to make sure that we are creating value there. That would be my.
So as someone who wants to receive these things, what I'll say is I think it might, you're totally right, but it might be worth having a little carve out. And in particular, I'm thinking about for like GitHub, because I'm going to have to build a parser translator from whatever GitHub throws at me to a CD event. I'm probably not the only one. And, you know, I totally agree about Argo and all, you know, all these projects that we can totally just say, hey, buddy, build this in. But for something like GitHub, maybe GitLab, maybe Jenkins, like they're both so widespread and so kind of hard to just jump in and make change that I think we might want to have an exception for a couple of those that we would maintain. I don't really know what we mean by that, but just work together to have that translation.
Fair to expect that they will give us cloud events. And if they don't give us cloud events, even if you look at like Knative, we already have something that basically looks into Git repositories and then emit cloud events. So I'm expecting people to build these kind of things for most of the systems. And I'm hoping that we as CDEvents don't just duplicate that work. So we take kind of like as our input for our things like cloud events, and then we just map to our types. I don't think that we should be into the space of going and just duplicating the same effort from other projects that are already doing kind of like the cloud events mapping kind of thing. Because I do see CD events like as a higher level of abstraction on top of cloud events. So you can imagine like, you know, very low level events, like all the Tecton events that are being emitted now. And then this is just a bit up on the stack. And if that's kind of like where we are, if we sit on top of cloud events, then there is this need for translation. And it is a very domain-specific translation, right? Sometimes you create a Kubernetes cluster, and that means an environment. Sometimes you create like an entire Google project, and that's your environment, right? So it's kind of like a different perspective depending on who is defining what an environment is or what the service is, on defining what's the actual trigger for that event to happen. And hence, like, this is a very complicated like integration problem that I think that we can scope by saying somebody will emit a cloud event, and that will result into a CD event. Expecting that someone emits a CD event, I think that it's very far-fetched right now. And it maybe will come when we prove enough value, but for the next 2 years, I think that we will just be we just can just not wait for that to happen. And I don't know, Andrea, like if
no, I agree. I mean, I understand there is a lot of inertia because like when systems are consumed by huge ecosystem, if you want to make changes, it takes time, and there are all kind of other issues as well. So there is a lot of inertia there. One thing that I would like to say then, but we need to be careful when designing the protocol to make sure if you are assuming that we are going to be translating from one language to another language, what do we do with features that may require more context than is from the event that we get in, right? So I don't know if we want to think about like the links feature. Do we want to have then something built in this translation layer that is able to communicate with a repository of events to like enrich the events as they are translated? It gets very, very complex. So I think maybe it's also important then when we define features that would require more context, that we keep them as optional in the beginning and say, okay, this is something that is like an extra thing that we can do, but always be ready to say, okay, yeah, we to be like the core CD event spec, you can do it by like taking the events that you get, translating it. And if you have like more sophisticated scenarios, if you have like, if you need more context, then you can have these extra components, but I wouldn't put it like in the mandatory part of the spec, if it makes sense.
I'm thinking about something that Dave mentioned here before, like for CD events to become attractive, there are probably a few major systems that we need to make sure that whatever happens in those systems gets emitted as CD events. And probably the first thing we're going to do is not going to be to go and force those systems to send CD events by themselves, but to build some sort of layer that sends CD events. I'm wondering, would it be possible, and this is just me thinking out loud, we build and sort of maintain a project that receives whatever signals, could be cloud events like which you mentioned, it could be other endpoints or webhooks or whatever, and then send seed events. And as we do that, people start building really cool visualization things, interoperability things, metrics things on top of seed events. And then when those are more like stable and used and valuable, we then go back to the original source of this data and say, hey, the data that you are sending, we are translating that to CD events, and people are getting, your users are getting a lot of value out of that because they can visualize things, they can do metrics, they can interoperate with a lot of things. We don't really want to maintain this translator anymore. It's a lot of work for us. Could you take this over? Could you help us do this? Could you integrate this in your system? Is that something that happens at all, or is that just a pipe dream?
I think that some version of that is not a pipe dream, but a requirement. I mean, I see this as a two-sided marketplace, and we've got a couple sort of 800-pound gorillas on one side of the marketplace who are great at GitHub and GitLab. I'm sure we can get the ear of someone who totally wants to make this happen. I'm sure they're going to be severely constrained, and it'll take them years to make it happen. So yeah, I think we need to operate somehow as like a clearinghouse. I mean, I would love to say let's operate a software as a service, but no one's going to use that because of security. But making it as easy as that, of like, hey, here's how you get your stuff from GitHub into a CDEvents compatible system. To put it another way, if this community doesn't work together to make it, I'm going to have to make it, and I'm going to do it badly. So I would love to do it together.
At least in terms of GitLab, I know that they're super receptive to changes in general. My company has multiple commits fixing their webhooks. I don't know if they'd be up for like a complete new system. I'm also not sure, like, the CD events specify the transmission layer, or is it just like the event payload specification? Like, are webhooks fine as a CD event, and also like things going straight into a RabbitMQ?
Yeah, so I don't see why webhooks wouldn't be fine as long as we just define like how would that transmission do. Right now, we only build on cloud events as a starting point, but what the specification really provides as value, in my opinion, is what attributes do we have and what do those attributes mean? And those could presumably be sent just as well over a webhook as they could over something else if we just define the packaging for that or whatever you want to call it.
And yeah, in fact, one of the reasons we picked cloud events as a transport is because it gives you this abstraction layer on transport, actually. So you can define a cloud event, but you don't have to choose which kind of transport you're using below. I mean, you can, if you use the cloud events SDK, you can basically configure them to send them events over HTTP with JSON payload, or you can send them in NATs, or you can send them in MQTT. And I think they have a spec for webhooks on cloud event side as well now. So, you know, it could. So what we focus on is really like the payload and how we bind into this kind of transport. But yeah, so that's about GitLab. We have some connection with GitLab. Actually, there is on the GitLab upstream tracking system, there is a discussion ongoing about CDEvents adoption that has been going on for maybe a couple of months. So there is interest. At least I know one person, Kevin, on GitLab side that is very interested in having events. But of course, I mean, everything is based on other technologies right now. So there is a lot of inertia there. And, you know, you need to show value for things to happen. But yeah, we started a discussion. I think that's good.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest issue for all these big players is they can't just get rid of their current like webhook system.
Yeah.
So like we're asking them to maintain two things then in parallel. If we were to say like, hey, you need to support CDEvents yourself, versus like if there was a community tool that translated like their native webhook system into CDEvents that they then like sponsored or took over or like put core resources to, I think that would be more amenable to them than them maintaining two things like in their production stack.
Yeah, because there is like a little bit of a catch-22 here that to show value, we need events from the gorilla players or the gorillas, as you said. But also to get events from these gorillas, we will eventually need their support as well. So I think we're probably going to have to put a little bit of extra effort in ourselves in the beginning just to get things connected. And then when we can show value more clearly, then, as you said, having those players sponsor or even drive those like community translation layers would be great. Then they could help with the maintenance because it provides their users with a lot of value.
Yeah.
So yeah, and I think that's probably an area where it feels like me that these translators don't necessarily have to be super complex. Obviously, you need to understand the source of the data and you need to understand CDEvents, but both those two things should be reasonably well documented. So I think this could be, I'm thinking like something like Google Summer of Code, if that is an area where those translation things, some of those could be built, or just pretty nice startup tasks for people wanting to join open source if they have like some programming skills and would like to work on such a translation layer. Because probably we're going to need quite a lot of them to show value. And we should definitely figure out which ones do we need first and how do we prioritize the work. But there's plenty of exciting things to work on there, I think.
Yeah. No, I was just going to say, like, yeah, we are a very small community, and we're, striving to work on the spec and that's the SDKs, and I mean, we can add more the translation layers, and we can add like common filtering mechanism, but we increase the scope a lot, but the number of people that we are working on it doesn't grow. So, and yeah, so definitely, I mean, we can try, we will reach out and see if we can do like Google Summer of Codes, or also we have other connection to get more people, young people working with us on these things. Yeah, but really the hope is that we generate also enough interest, like coming here to conferences, advocating about this, discussing with the folks to, get some people involved and really contributing to where it makes sense for them, to drive this like projects within CDEvents, and this tooling and this translation layers and all the things that, like Mauricio said, at the end of the day, you need to make things happen, because if you're building a POC and you need to write all these adapters, it takes you a certain amount of time. If you have 10 of them ready out of the shelves, then you start creating a new POC every month or every week.
Just mentioned like a strong +1 to like ruthlessly prioritizing, because we are obviously have limited resources. I would encourage us not to let the enormity of the number of things we could build distract us from getting the first one. Because I mean, honestly, for my sake, I don't really care about having 50 adapters. I care about having maybe 2. So if we can really prioritize those 2, maybe we can get those out there.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point. Thanks.
Yes, really good discussion. We have about 20 minutes left. So I wanted to just ask everyone in the room if there's anyone here now who feels that like, oh, why did you discuss all these boring topics? I wanted to discuss this. If you have any such things, please let us know, or just yell out, because we have some time, and we can definitely take on another topic or two if anyone has anything they are passionate about. Anyone online that has any requests for topics to discuss?
Can I dream a bit?
Yes, grab a microphone and then you can dream a bit.
Now, I will go back and refer to standardization topic, not specific to descriptive or prescriptive events. Like I am coming from telco. I have background in telco, and as you know, especially what's happening in the telco industry with all this virtualization, cloud native, disaggregation, openness, how things are getting pretty interesting there. And it's probably similar with other industries as well. Some of them are ahead, some of them are behind. But as you all know, like the open source became the product development for many different companies, many different industries. Like in the past, those companies have been developing their products purely internally with all this proprietary hardware and software, but things are changing. And open source communities are considered part of the product development. So the development is also shifted left. It doesn't start in company premises, it starts on upstream communities. And when we think about the CI/CD aspects, how to ingest open source software, how to consume that with all this, security issues, like supply chain topic, which is hot, I start dreaming like, okay, again, this is very ambitious dream. Like if we had something like CDEvents adopted by GitHub, Google Source, GitLab, where the actual development is happening, done by open source communities, that could actually make a big difference with everything that happens in enterprises, like all this end-to-end flow, like the enterprises don't need to, consume GitHub events or Google Source events or GitLab events. They are all different from each other. But if there is some kind of de facto standard in place that could actually tie things from the field back to open source repositories. It's kind of like, again, this is maybe a big dream or it's maybe impossible. I don't know, just because this is happening. And I think it is the right time to continue pushing this. And again, what Eric, you said and what the project said, like, let's focus on small things first, get the project out there, 0.1 version. But I think the opportunities are limitless, It's like, what about having some supply chain type of stuff in this thing? Talking about like, oh, vulnerability published, like I think I highlight this during webinar you had a few weeks ago. So it's like, that's what I want to share. Like, if we could take a bit broader approach to all this software flow, then that would make really our lives much better. So,
Kind of like SDLC events.
Yeah, call that. So,
okay.
Yeah, I think that there is I've had a thought for a while regarding this. So I'm not sure how everyone in this room does it, but if I'm running a project and I want to understand that one of my dependencies has gotten a new version, I don't really have a very good strategy for how to discover that. I typically either discover it by accident, or I receive an email, or there's a CVE connected to it and I get a panic and I need to update. Something that just seemed interesting to me as a concept would be, what if we have a global CDEvents message bus for all these open source projects that deploy, and then it doesn't matter if the deployment goes into some Artifactory or Nexus, or it's a GitHub release or a GitLab release or whatever it is, but they all emit events saying that now there is a new artifact version for this artifact. And then that would go into like a central message bus that anyone in the world could connect to and set up filters for receiving stuff, so that when Log4j releases a new version of their library, I can pick that up immediately when it's released, and I can do my testing or whatever I want to do on it and see if I want to include that in my application. I don't know if there is such a thing today, or how people do that today.
All of a sudden, it's not a coincidence that we're in town at the same time as the cryptocurrency people, because I think you just described a use case for blockchain.
Yeah.
And I might actually even mean that in seriousness.
Yeah, because I think, I'm not sure if Fatih, that goes in line with your broader scope thinking, but yeah.
Yeah, it's like that kind of thing, like a lot of sense, but yeah, 5 years, 10 years, 3 years, I don't know.
Yeah. I have a colleague, he just finished putting out JReleaser, which that's one of the spaces that he was trying to solve, is how do you let people know that you've got a new release for your project or your library? And I think what we do right now is just, don't specify the version so that we get the latest, which is, causes all kinds of other problems. So yeah, when you're explicitly defining versions, that is a good point. It's hard to get to know when the new one's coming out, or to test it, not just automatically put it in your system before you've actually vetted it.
Yeah, exactly. Because if I got an event, I could trigger my own pipeline to introduce that new dependency version, do all the testing, and then I get a pop-up in my Slack channel saying, oh, there was a new release of this library, all the tests passed. You can now decide if you want to include it or not, or make a new proper release of your system or not. So there's some interesting stuff that can be done there as well, I think.
There is something happening with that already, right? Like in GitHub nowadays, you get notifications if one library has a vulnerability, and you get a pull request just to update that library. And that's pretty advanced, to be honest. So like tapping into these systems that already exist, mostly for like front end, kind of like JavaScript thingy. But yeah, I think that's coming, definitely. Yeah, it's coming because the capability is there now. How do you integrate with like a global ecosystem? That's we are. Yeah, and everybody is like in a different level of maturity, right? Like I was like surprised when I moved from Java to Go, for example. It's like you have Maven like and Sonatype with their like massive repositories that they are maintaining for the entire community. But when you go to like like JavaScript or like even Go, like that's a completely different ecosystem. So like not like we are just trying to tackle like the unification of all the ecosystems using events. So that's kind of like an interesting problem to solve. And I think that it's going to come, but yeah, it's like finding out kind of like where each community is and how do you actually unify like what you were describing at the very beginning, like what the package is, what like an artifact is. I think that it's pretty like that's the starting point for that discussion.
But I think it's fun to be part of a project where there is no limit to what could be done. As Fatih said, I mean, you can dream for as much as you want to, and there's always another use case for using events. At the same time, it's a challenge because, as Andrea said, we're not that many in the community today, and definitely we can't afford to all pull in different directions, because then we will have 1/20th done solutions rather than having one done solution. So yeah.
I think just because now we have to do this event was like perfect. Like I understand this like community member, but because of my English, but like thing is like interoperability was one of the key topics discussed during the event, and CDEvents.
Yeah, microphone please.
The other one is like now again, if you could put like point one something there. If people could start playing with experimenting with something stable, that would make even more interesting, and we will get even more people helping with this. So we can discuss and dream as long as we want, but we have to get this out there. You know.
Thought we were dreaming today, but yes. Are folks familiar with Open Source Insights, deps.dev? It's a sort of by Google, but it's really meant to be a community thing, and it's like a massive database of open source packages and versions and such and such. You can query it as a public data set. I don't think it provides any sort of like event stream, but that might be an opportunity. And certainly, you know, it's the kind of thing that Google has the infrastructure to support if we can get someone to, I'm not really the right person, but I might be able to find someone who could help us work through that.
Could you give me the name again, just for the notes?
Just go to deps.dev.
Deps.dev, yes.
I think that was announced like 2 months ago.
Yeah, it's been a little quiet.
Yeah.
But it's more like a static version of what you're describing. But all you have to do is, you know, write a message, then on top of it, you can have
Nice. Okay. What's our next topic, or who has the next topic?
What's next?
That is a very good topic to round out on, I think. Very good choice. So topic is what's next. So obviously from the CDEvents project, we are going to work with the 0.1 roadmap that Andreas showed before, which again contains basically, I would say, filling in some gaps. It's not really about introducing new events, what I can remember. It's more about getting the events we have to have a proper schema, to have some more clarification on how to use cloud events attributes and such things. But that's, of course, only part of the work. We are, as we said, we have a Go SDK, which I'm not sure if it's entirely up to date. I think it may need to change a little bit. The Java SDK is maybe the one seeing most active development right now. Python SDK, as Maurizio mentioned, needs to be built as well. Not necessarily for 0.1, but definitely quite soon. But then there are a lot of open discussions in our GitHub project regarding new event types, regarding additions to existing events, regarding how to, like Andrea mentioned, version and package and release our specification and our SDKs. So, yeah, as always, one of my hopes is that we get, continue to have some activity in our discussions, because that, based on what I see, a combination between our discussions and our meetings is where things happen. I'm not sure if you would agree, Andrea, but I think the way decisions has typically happened before is that we use the discussion between the meeting to let things mature and to bring everyone's perspective in, but the actual decisions tend to be taken in the meeting, mostly because, to be honest, we realized that, we never finished this discussion. Let's finish it here to get a decision. I'm sure there's a better way to do it, but that's where we are right now. Yes.
So I think all that, and I think we have a couple of 2 or 3 actionable streams that I would like very much to follow. One is the DORA metrics POC, because, as Dave mentioned, they're going to work on separating the queries from the sources, and so we can, benefit very much from that. See what is the data that we need to have in the spec. So that's one thing. We got some feedback, some issues created by colleagues from Apple, that they started looking at the spec, and so I think that's a very actionable thing to look at and can spawn new discussion, and we can try and include those in the 0.1 version. I had this week also some interesting discussion with the team at Fidelity. They're very interested in adopting CDEvents. So again, this is something that I would do, like try to do work with them to make sure that what we do in 0.1 doesn't miss things that they need, at least for an initial POC on their side. Yeah, unfortunately they could not join today, but we can have further discussion with them synchronous. So I think hopefully all this gives us enough, starting to get some more critical mass, like CDEvents. If we have CDEvents used in something like 4 keys, CDEvents used by a customer, we get like good feedback from people who start using it. That helps us like drive then 0.2 and the next versions and so forth. And maybe from one other thing that I got from all the discussion today is that something that maybe we should prioritize as well is like the GitHub adapter. But that's that's maybe we can find one person that does that.
But I feel that it's almost done. That's the thing. Like I feel that we have all the pieces and we just need some.
Yeah. But yeah, so that's even better if it's small effort. But I think it's something that I would like to see like in the list of high priority things that we need to follow up in the next weeks and months. But yeah.
Yes, so I would say I've been positively surprised at, for instance, people in talks like the Open Telemetry talk that are not directly related to CDEvents have mentioned CDEvents. That, of course, cannot translate into everyone getting involved in CDEvents because people have other things that they need to work on. But there is an interest and there is a belief somehow that this could become interesting. And that's why people are here in the room today as well. And somehow we need to not drop the ball on this so that we keep people's interest peaked. It's always a bit dangerous over the summer because people tend to take vacation and things tend to slow down a bit. But maybe that's the perfect time for people who have time and drive over the summer to get some things moving forward, and then we can come back in the fall with full attention on this. Emil, I'm not sure if you would like to say a few words on your side, what you think the way forward would be for the project.
No, I think you explained it quite well. I'm a bit concerned that it's a bit fuzzy around the line still. What on the edges, I would say. How much work is actually left? I mean, it's not clearly defined what we actually need to do, but that I believe that needs to be set very soon. But what I was about to say before was also that we currently have one meeting every week. So every 2 weeks we have a SIG meeting where we have more like administrative discussions, mostly talking about conferences coming up and having presentations as well from the community. And then we have the vocabulary meeting every other week where we discuss. We try at least to keep those meetings more to discuss the actual protocol and issues we see there and such things. So I guess in both of these meetings, we now need to focus on how can we finalize the work on the 0.1 vocabulary or the specification itself, and then how can we get it out? What do we need to document and what needs to be in place surrounding it, so to say. That needs to happen, I would say, the coming few weeks, so we can then after the summer holidays get up to speed quickly, so we can finalize it during the autumn sometime, hopefully.
Yeah, and I really don't think it is that much more. It's not an impossible task to reach 0.1. There are some discussions we need to close and some choices we need to make. And I guess especially those kind of choices that if we don't make them, they may lead to radical backwards incompatible changes to the specification later on. So if it's only about adding new events, that's still very much backwards compatible. But if it's about changing the structure of existing events in a major way, that can be quite tricky. Then again, we can't, of course, lock us down to never making any changes, but thinking some of those things through would be very beneficial.
I think we shouldn't be too afraid of seeing that we might have non-backwards compatible changes in the future or quite soon. I mean, it's a 0.1 release we talk about. It's not the 1.0 release yet. So I think it's more important to get the 0.1 release out in some shape or form than getting the full Lancy, so to say, specification that we think will never change until 1.0 or something. Because it will for sure change. So we need to find the balance there, and quite soon.
Yeah, it's this balance of making life easy for us by allowing ourselves to make any changes we want versus making or keeping the trust of whoever uses the specification. Because if it's seen as something, oh, they change everything every release, then of course that's not good either. So yeah, anyone who has input on that balance, we're very happy to hear your thoughts on it.
I think after this event today, I'll go back and on the GitHub project for the roadmap. There are a couple of things that we need to add from the discussion today, and maybe then the next meeting we can review it together and like nail down more clearly what is the scope, like Emil was saying, so we have a clear understanding of what it is that we want to do before 0.1. And yeah.
Yes, we have about 2 minutes left of the scheduled time. What I would be interested in hearing is does anyone in the room have like a use case where you think it would be really cool if I could use CDEvents to do this that we haven't already talked about? Just to give us some input on that. We've talked about the 4 keys. We've talked about like possibly replacing or standardizing internal events. We've talked about integrating these massive projects together. But there is a very wide variety of use cases we could have. Does anyone feel that there's something that we have not talked about today that we should at least bring with us going forward? If you don't have it right now, we would be happy to hear about it in the Slack channel or similar that we have. But maybe we should just wrap up, Andrea, by doing some PR for how to reach us. I'm sure most of you in the room know that already. Fatih posted a link in the HackMD document and in the chat for how to get an invite to the CD Foundation Slack. There we have a channel called CDEvents. We also have cdevents.dev, which Andrea is showing now, which also contains some information on how to get in touch with us. Yes.
So we have a mailing list, Twitter account, we have GitHub and the link to the Slack as well. So there are a few ways, depending on your platform of choice, that you can use to get in touch with us. And yeah, for the notes, I mean, they're not complete yet, but we have this HackMD that we created for the document. It's shared in the chat on Bevy and also on Slack. But something that I like to do with this kind of events is get feedback about how the event logistics, structure, agenda was in general, so that we can, next time we make a community summit for CDEvents, we can do it better. So I'll add a feedback session here, a feedback section. And if you have comments, yeah, please let us know so that we can, yeah, continue improving for next time.
Yes, so with that, we are right on our scheduled time. We would like to thank you so much for attending and for all the great discussions and for all the great topics that you have brought up. Andrea, you said you will have a look at the recording and try to update the notes based on that.
Yeah.
Let me know if you want any help with that. And yeah, the discussion will continue in our meetings, in our Slack, and in our GitHub discussions there. And yeah, as I mentioned before or hinted at before, I'm personally leaving this conference with a high spirits, because I think both the reception to our talks and the reception to CDEvents in general has been positive. It makes it a fun project to work on, even though it's difficult to it's like herding cats, getting everything together and getting everyone's opinion represented in the specification. But yeah, I have really enjoyed it.
Same here.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks everyone
Yeah,
again.
I can only agree. Yeah. From a virtual perspective, it has been great as well.
Oh, that's good.
Awesome. But then again, thank you all for attending. I hope you enjoyed this session and we've really benefited from your input. And yeah, enjoy the rest of the day and thank you.
Thank you.
Bye everyone remotely.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks for all the good inputs. Really nice.
I came in thinking maybe CDEvents is a thing. I don't know. And now I'm like, this is the way. I'm going to make it happen.